live. It is Thursday, August 27th, 2020, 5 o'clock p.m. It is 68 days until Election Day, 146 days until Inauguration Day. My neighbor is still mowing his hay in the property next door, so that sound that sounds like a helicopter is not a helicopter. My dogs are on the porch getting ready for somebody to come by whom they can charge after and terrorize. It is threatening a thunderstorm at the cabin in the woods, and Kate has spent the day in tomato larceny and has a monologue about it.
I actually spent the day doing chores, but yesterday was tomato larceny. So let me explain. There's so we started in the green room before this was public. Margaret was nicely, very kindly complimenting me on my pictures of my tomatoes in my garden, which I have lots of tomatoes of my own. So I just want to say that I don't need tomatoes by any stretch of the imagination. But at the same time, that I was building my big garden, the house 2 doors down from me, we have never met these people. They just moved in a couple of months ago. We're clearing land and putting in raised beds. And John, my partner, was like, oh man, it's your rival garden. You have to compete with them. So we've been oh man, their tomatoes are already red. And we walk by and we kind of see them. And you have to walk into this little path from the street to get to them because there's no way down from their house through all the brush. Anyways, it's a beautiful set of gardens. And then they kind of just disappeared. They didn't disappear. You kept seeing their car there, but they just were never gathering any of these things. And I would drive by and peek through this little hole in the brush, and there were just dozens of bright red tomatoes, and then there were dozens of bright red tomatoes on the ground, and I was like, this is terrible. Why are they not picking their tomatoes? There's a car in the driveway. What's wrong with these people? And maybe people are not as obsessive about their gardens as I am. And then there's huge weeds, everything, their corn is falling over, all of this stuff. And so anyways, I'm a property professor. I kind of had this thought of well, is it trespass? But it's attracting squirrels, so it's a nuisance. And so maybe if I can them and they come after me, I'll have to pay them for the cost of the tomato, but not the cost of the canned product. What? It was this whole
possession, not
hostile possession's not a thing.
No, but if you just take their tomatoes and can them,
that's called stealing.
No.
Is hostile possession your really nice word for stealing then?
Yeah, I don't think you even need the crime a day guide to know that's stealing. Yeah.
I'm trying to think of nice words for it.
You were thinking of adverse possession, but it's not adverse possession either.
I was not thinking of adverse possession. You weren't proposing to live in the tomatoes.
Yes, exactly.
That's her next move. That's the next move.
And so right before a thunderstorm, because I knew it was going to swell the tomatoes and kill a bunch more and have them all fall to the ground, I went and just hurriedly gathered all of this rotting tomatoes and as Drew says, liberated the tomatoes. I liberated them. And a number of cucumbers that were huge, and on the vine they had a cucumber that was the size of a zucchini, and all of this kind of stuff. And I pulled up a bunch of their weeds for them, and then I was okay, this is too much, I should leave because I am trespassing in their garden. And no, they're having I don't think that they've noticed they have about 8 beautiful huge eggplant that I'm gonna go back for at some point.
Wait, so Kate, the question is, do they watch this show? Because if they watch this show now, they know. They know everything.
I hope not. They don't know where I am. I could be talking about anyone. Except
all right,
if they
we're doing
see
a
me
poll
creep
on what
by.
the proper term for what Kate did.
What is the proper... So this is this weird thing. I'm just...
Hostile possession.
Hostile possession.
Sharing.
Sharing.
Expropriation.
Yeah. So what are
Liberation.
These tomatoes? Yeah. do you like, I just don't like, there is just this thing where like, so to give some context, when I used to live in Brooklyn and space was very small, there was a public garden where you could have a small part of a raised bed or a raised bed yourself, and you could grow stuff, and people would leave regularly. Like you get so excited in March and you plant all this shit, and then like it gets really big and you forget about it, and like it's August and New York City sucks in August, and so everyone leaves, and then like all your tomatoes come in, and I would be like like going through picking up tomatoes, because in New York they're really a nuisance. Like they'll just be like rats everywhere, and so that was like the rule of the garden, was like if if like a tomato is like really about pizza rats, yes, pizza rats, except this is like pre-pizza rat. You don't even make it into pizza yet. It's like latent, or like, yeah, and tomato rats. So anyways, I did this thing, and I just like, I went into this, as I am wont to do, into this complete spiral about whether or not it was ethical, or whether it was like unethical, or whether it was actually very ethical, or whether it was like, or like, and then like I was less concerned with the legality. I like definitely knew that technically it was like against the law, but I was more interested in like the ethics and the morals around it, and so. And people's
I just want to say
reaction.
to everyone who is voting for liberation, you are a bunch of commies. And, and,
I honestly I'm voting for theft, and I can't believe that I'm doing this, but like, yes.
The poll is up. I will take it as
conveniently
front to my
David,
joke.
the local magistrate, is my dad.
Every one of you who doesn't vote for hostile possession, I'm going to take it personally. So far, there's 80 people on the Crowdcast, and I've got 2 votes. I
switched my vote from theft to hostile possession.
All right, we are not allowed to have fun anymore.
Sorry,
even
Margaret.
when we are hostily possessing other people's tomatoes. But in lieu of fun, I just want you to think about what poor Margaret Taylor has had to do the last week while you were liberating tomatoes or watching this show. Margaret has been reading the SSCI report, not some of it, not most of it, but all of it. And, it is like 1,000 pages long. And I have to say, with all due respect to the people who wrote it, a lot of it is not scintillating prose. There's a few really good passages. We're going to actually start there. We want to find out what Margaret's favorite passage of it is. I have mine. So let's start there, Margaret. You've read the whole damn thing to shepherd Lawfare's group magnum opus about this. And by the way, shout out to a member of the audience. Margaret's presence here on the show tonight was actually the idea of one of you guys. Jim McGuckin suggested that we have Margaret and Quinta on to talk about this magnum opus, which is our effort to answer the question, what does it show in the way of collusion? And so poor Margaret has had to go through the whole report as our kind of lead on this. So what's your favorite part? What's the best passage in the report?
Oh, man. I don't know. Maybe instead of the best passage, what I will just say was something that I just didn't expect in there was there's a whole section on President Trump's history in Moscow, in particular his first trip, what they think is his first trip in 1996, which was some sort of like a businessmen gathering, which, the report intimates pretty strongly, like it's kind of, they put on these like business events to essentially entice American and other national businessmen in order to purposely put them in compromising situations and, get compromat on them. It's very clear that that's sort of how the whole thing works out. And so the report actually, they went and found pictures of Trump with various people who were in this business meeting thing in Moscow. And it goes into all of this detail about how various people said, yes, he had an affair with this woman who was at one of these events, who was a former Miss Moscow, and that, there's sort of a lot of smoke around whether they had an affair, but it never, corroborates it. But they went and found these pictures from 1996, which means, you guys know 1996, that's not a digital photo. That is like a, old timey thing. And so it just was kind of amazing. And
it's like a brownie camera.
Crazy. And they put it in there and they kind of like black out her face. And so you can't actually see her face. So you don't really know who she is. But
you look up all of the Miss Moscows and figure it out?
So I actually did try to do that, Kate. And I couldn't, I spent maybe 15 minutes on it just so because I wanted to say something like, despite the report not having the name, it's pretty easy to find out the person's name, and maybe I wouldn't say it or whatever. But I spent 15 minutes on it, and I couldn't find with certainty like who it was. And she actually gave some interviews, and this is in the report. She gave interviews in 2007 where she actually talks about Donald Trump having a mutual affection with him and being on really good footing with him and all this stuff. But they still don't tell you who it is. And I still couldn't figure it out. I'm sure there are some more accomplished investigative reporters who could and have probably hunted it down, but I couldn't. But those photos were just kind of amazing.
Oh, it looks like Michael Weiss did it for the Spectator. The link is in the thing.
It's not her. She's not identified in the report, but it's not
really
secret who she is. So, but I have a serious question and a not so serious question about this. The serious question first, why is it significant if he had an affair with a Russian model in 1996? He's hardly known as he's always portrayed himself as a kind of bon vivant. He's boasted about his, shall we say, less than consensual conquests. He's been accused of dozens of sexual misconduct / assaults. Why is it even interesting if he had a mutual affection in Moscow in 1996?
So your question speaks, I think, to the scope of this report, which is much different from the scope of, say, the Mueller report, because this section that this is in it's kind of running down the allegations that have been made and were made sort of initially in the Steele dossier that compromise was of a sexual nature was collected on Trump in 2013 when he was in Moscow for the Miss Universe, his Miss Universe pageant, and the through line on it is that there's this guy who I think is an American and he holds a Russian passport as well. His name is David Giovannis. This is in the report. He met David Giovannis in 1996, maintained a relationship with David Giovannis over time, and then in 2013, David Giovannis also escorted Trump apparently around Moscow, took him to parties, etc. in 2013. And so all of the questions in the Steele dossier around the compromise of a sexual nature was sort of on that trip. So it sort of lays the through line, the predicate for how far back these relationships go with David Giovannis being connected to Russian oligarchs, connected to the Russian government. And I think it's really trying to show how far back these things go, how deep they are. I mean, how it has continued over time and the sort of it seemed to me, the systematic nature of the collection of the compromat that could have been collected on the current U.S. president.
Yeah, I mean, I think the critical point is that, first of all, while there's been a huge amount of um, uh, both concern about and dismissal of the 2013 peace tape story, um, the idea that there may be a sexual compromise with respect to Trump in Moscow is not a trivial one, and that is compromising precisely because it has never become public. And by the way, it is precisely the sort of thing that absolutely prevents people from getting security clearances on a routine basis. And this brings me to my less than entirely serious question, which is when you are in Moscow and the very attractive member of the opposite sex approaches you at a hotel or at a cocktail party, based on the Senate Intelligence Committee report, when is it safe to assume that that person is just interested in you and not doing work for the Russian intelligence service?
Never, 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 never.
There you go.
Yeah, never.
And
actually, Ben, can I tell a quick story about myself?
Did
I
get a honeypot?
No, but no.
Darn.
So okay,
not that she'll admit anyway.
I want to get this right. I've been to Moscow one time, and it was in 1995, and so I was there with my family. My sister, actually, she majored in Russian studies in college and moved there in like 94, 95. And so my family, we went over to visit her, and we went into Moscow and St. Petersburg. And one of the things that she set up for us through like a local travel agent was visiting this thing. It was called the Kgb Museum. And it was fascinating. So this travel agent like took us to this place. There was no sign. It was just like this door in Moscow. And, we were the only people in there basically. And a guy like showed us around. It was absolutely fascinating. Sort of perspective on, there were sort of these triumphant pictures of American spies being shot, assassinated, basically. It's just fascinating to sort of see it all. And that trip, of course, later I got security clearances and everything. And that trip was something definitely that when I was going through my security clearance process, they were interested in. And they were like, and I told them all about it. I was like, yeah, I told them everything we did in Moscow. And they're very interested in that. Like, did anyone approach you when you were at this museum? Did they, ask you, any questions that seemed odd? So, it's, I think this contact and this question, it's obviously very well known to the U.S. government. They're definitely interested in it. Nothing sort of strange happened when I was there, but you can definitely see how these things can come about, and you don't not necessarily look on the lookout for them.
So I have a favorite part of
this report,
yes. Which is in the Maria Butina section. Maria Butina, who remains my personal hero, came here from Russia to infiltrate the NRA, got the job done, flipped a whole lot of people at the NRA, including leadership level people, turned them pro-Moscow. I mean, she is the bomb. But there is a part, and her big failure in life as an agent in the United States was that she could not infiltrate the Trump campaign. And she seems to be the one Russian who couldn't infiltrate the Trump campaign. But she never really got in, and the closest she gets is a guy named J.D. Gordon, who was a foreign policy and national security spokesman for the Trump campaign. Actually, somebody I know from back when he he was a spokesman for JTF Gitmo down a number of years ago. and she meets him at a reception or something, and they have some drinks, and she tries to, get him talking, and they have a conversation. They agree that Russian-American relations should be a whole lot better. And what is her big score that she gets out of this contact with a Trump campaign official? He invites her to a Styx concert, and they go out to a Styx concert together, and that strikes me as it's my favorite part of the entire report. There's no account, by the way, of how either of them liked the Styx concert or whether they're but so the whole Alexander Torshin, Maria Butina investment in penetrating the Trump campaign made it as far as one happy hour and one Styx concert. It's not exactly the Trump Tower meeting. So, Margaret, what's your big takeaway from this? I have you're an old Senate hand, among other things. So I have a bunch of questions for you, both about the substance of the report, but also about the institutional performance of the Senate. Because I got to say that one of the things that impressed the hell out of me at this report is it is so much better and so much more bipartisan and factually compelling. It's a serious piece of reporting and research, and everybody's name is on all of it, at least at a factual level. And so I guess my first question is, does that suggest that the Senate may be performing at a bit of a higher level than we've been giving it credit for? And how much of that do you think personally, Richard Burr and Mark Warner deserve credit for, and how much is the institution more generally?
So I would say, based on my experience, these types of things absolutely tend to be driven by the members that are in charge. So I think Burr and Warner absolutely get the most credit of anyone by a lot for this. This is something clearly that the staff has slogged away at for years and years. And at any time, it would have been possible for Senator Burr to take steps to make it scope much less. Give them like a page limit. Say, no, we're not going to issue that subpoena, or whatever. And maybe there were instances where that happened. But the fact that Burr and Warner, approached this as a very serious project, they gave it a really wide scope, much wider than the Mueller report, what the Mueller report covers, and that it is so specific and factual. So they get the most credit, really, of anyone. The way these things happen, as I've experienced them, is the chair and ranking member and their staff, on the committee, will do this. And, you might brief the other members of the committee on sort of what's happening, but there wouldn't be like an ongoing role for the other members of the committee. So I really do credit Burr and Warner. I mean, I should also say, there's very little doubt in my mind that Burr was probably checking in with McConnell too on what he was doing. So it seems to me, was kind of an institutional, at least if you're thinking about Mitch McConnell, an institutional decision to let these facts be written on paper and let them come out. The other thing I will say about the report itself is, one thing I noticed in reading the whole thing is there's so many facts, and I think it's actually whoever really wrote this, and I don't know really which staffer it was or anything like that, but they did this ingenious thing where they put all these facts together in a way that if you read it, you can't help but come to certain conclusions in your mind about what's going on here. But then they don't actually say necessarily that thing, that conclusion. And probably because they couldn't, right? Because that was something that probably Republicans or people on the committee would have been like, no, that makes it too controversial. I'm not going to sign on to that. But it really was a pretty genius way, I think, that it was written, to just really lead the reader like a horse to water, in terms of understanding the implications while being fair and pointing out parts where they really couldn't come to a particular conclusion.
So, okay, help me out. I have read a lot of the report. I haven't read the whole thing. What do you take to be... So, the Republicans wrote a conclusion that said this shows there's no collusion. The Democrats wrote a conclusion that says, this shows there's a lot of collusion. Wyden wrote a conclusion that says even more than the other Democrats say. What do you take to be and I agree with you, the fundamental editorial decision here was, let's just lay out the facts and not draw any conclusions from it, because that's going to get politically contentious, whereas we can agree on certain basic factual matters. So now Senator Margaret Taylor is writing her additional views. What do you conclude? What does it mean at the end of the day?
So I guess the overarching point that I would make, it's actually a point they make in the end that is an agreed point, and I think it's the most important one in a lot of ways, which is the attempts by the Russian government, and frankly, I would also say other governments, to influence our elections, influence our politics, make their way into the power brokers and the political parties. It is pervasive. It is everywhere. And it's not just politicians. It's business people. Everybody in our society and our culture who has any sort of profile really has to be on alert that they could be being targeted, and you don't even know, right? You're being targeted and you don't know. It seems like it's coming from a friend. It's coming from an American. To me, that's kind of the big picture takeaway. I mean, I think based on the timing, this is coming out so close to the election. It is, obviously not making huge headlines because so much of this is already known. But it seems to me the committee wanted Americans and the public to know about these dangers that are very real and that are everywhere. And not only it's members of Congress too. They're saying to their colleagues, you guys are targets. You need to be careful. And that is, I think, the right message for them to send. That's the big picture part here. In addition, American voters need to be aware that there are companies out there who are collecting information on you, your financial information, layering that on top of your Facebook information to target you. Our political parties are collecting this information on you to target you with message, or to, manipulate you on social media. And so Americans need to be aware of that too. They spend a lot of time on this broader question of manipulation on social media.
Can I just ask a quick question, which is that I've wondered throughout all of the Russia saga as it's played out. Well, one is that I feel I am not a very sophisticated reader or and just person, I guess, generally on everything that happened with the Mueller report and the most recent Senate report. But I did follow the Steele dossier very quickly. I'm just very confused. It seems like there has been I feel like there has been at various points a smoking gun and then kind of not a smoking gun. There has been a moment that feels like it has been okay, Trump was in this room with these people and he lied about it, or Trump didn't lie about it, but was in this room with these people, but the people around him lied about it. Or there were moments where, I don't know, there were just various kinds of like all of these entanglements over time. I'm really not articulate about this because I've like read headlines and like have purposely, I think that like when this scandal started like going, it was like when I was starting to teach and I was made like a mental calculation of like I don't have time to both follow this like this scandal and like and do whatever, and this is going to be very depressing for me. But I'm really kind of curious, like what should people think about Trump's involvement specifically with Russia, and like what is the motivation of Russia outside of Trump? Okay, like what is the motivation for them to continue to screw with the elections and to do this? I mean, like a lot of people have their theories, but I'm interested with what yours are.
Yeah. So on this should have been my second point in response to Ben's question. The other important thing that people need to ask themselves is if the government of Russia is reaching out to me through various interlocutors, and I kind of pretty much know they are, what is my reaction going to be? My reaction as a political candidate for the presidency, as a political candidate for Congress, how am I going to react? And what this report really shows, I think, is that in so many ways, Trump and the members of the campaign, and then his other associates, sort of like Roger Stone, and Paul Manafort is sort of number one on this list. So welcoming, so enthusiastic, really capitalizing on what Russia was doing through WikiLeaks, capitalizing on all this outreach, doing the Trump Tower meeting with Natalia Veselnitskaya to see what dirt she had, really welcoming all of this. And so the question is, what norm are we going to have going forward about what interference by foreign governments is going to be acceptable in our elections? And I think what this shows is Trump was very open to it, and his campaign was very open to it in a number of different vectors. And so, will that be the norm going forward? Will that just become sort of okay activity or not? And I think it's principally American voters that will sort of decide that question.
But it's unclear whether there was actually a quid pro quo necessarily, like on anything in like, and that's like, it's kind of like, I don't think that any of these relationships or conversations could have just been like, oh, let's just have a conversation. Let's just we're all like a little bit too savvy for that. But like, I just feel there were a million points in the report that like the Mueller report and like the Russia investigation that people in my Facebook feed or Twitter feed were like, oh, this is the moment. This is the thing that is going to finally nail him. And none of it did. And I just kind of like, I'm confused as to what happened.
So I think you're, first of all, I think you have to ask the question at three different levels. One is the criminal level. And, people forget this about the Mueller report, but the Mueller report's conclusion, at least in volume 1, was there's insufficient evidence to make a criminal case on any of this stuff. And so if the question is, did somebody commit a crime by the standards that we use, the answer is no.
Right.
So the second level is the level of counterintelligence risk and mitigation. And that's the subject of this report, right? And, the report describes all kinds of things that would normally be understood as reflecting grave counterintelligence risk that you would take mitigating steps to deal with. And some of them have been taken and some of them have not. So Paul Manafort is not in government. Michael Flynn is no longer in government, right? There have been certain important steps taken to mitigate counterintelligence risk. There is no way to mitigate the counterintelligence risk posed by the president himself, because the president himself is entitled, as he did, by the way, to sit in the Oval Office with the foreign minister and ambassador of a hostile foreign adversary country and blurt out an ally's ongoing counterintelligence operations. He's just allowed to do that. And so these are things that you would take very decisive action to deal with other people, but you can't deal with respect to the president. And then but you can expose. And the significance of this report is that it exposes the degree of counterintelligence risk that the president and his immediate coterie exposed the country to. And it allows a reasonable reader to come to whatever conclusions he or she wants regarding what price we may have paid for it. Now, I have my opinions about that. I'm sure Margaret has hers. And clearly Marco Rubio has a different set of understandings of that. But it does lay it all out there. The final level is the political accountability level. And, you know, I think it's pretty amazing and frankly commendable that whatever they've said in their statements about this, the Republican members of the Senate Intelligence Committee let this thing become public in the 3 months before an election. And, you know, maybe that was political pressure that forced them to do it, but they did do it. And it's, I think that's a very laudable thing. And I agree with Margaret that Richard Burr, you know, even if he ends up getting indicted for his stock trades, his handling of this matter will be something he will be remembered for in a positive way as long as people think about congressional oversight under difficult conditions. And so I think the answer is, you know, at the political level, you can have all the smoking guns you want. If the people who've been shot don't care, there's no political accountability. And that's what we have here. We have 1,000 pages of smoking gun. And, I mean, up to and including in the first, 50 pages of it, it describes how the president's campaign manager was in a business relationship with an active Russian intelligence operative to whom he was providing confidential campaign information on an ongoing basis. If that's not a smoking gun, I don't know what is. But if people don't care, the gun can smoke until it's out of, saltpeter or whatever.
That is actually such a great summary that I've been looking for, I think, for the past year plus of how to understand the significance of all of this. That was a really great, those 3 levels were perfect, Ben. Thank you for that. Margaret, though, I want to get your take too. Do you agree with Ben?
Oh, I definitely do. What I want to do is answer your second question, which is what were the Russians hoping to get out of this?
Yes.
And so
and what are they continuing to hope to get out of broader election interference that they're kind of running and that people are getting worried about and that all of the people working in disinformation in elections are kind of trying to combat?
Yeah, I mean, I think, one way to think of it is that governments, including the U.S. government, they're always looking for ways to influence other countries in such a way that the country will make policy decisions that will benefit the country. You know what I mean? So what I saw in this SSCI report in many instances was it seemed like a genuine desire to get Putin and Trump together because Putin has a need, which is to get rid of sanctions. So this is sort of the policy part of it. He wants to get rid of those sanctions. If he can get someone in power in the United States who can get rid of those sanctions and get the Europeans to list those sanctions, that's good for him because those sanctions are keeping his oligarchs from collecting their money and spending their money around the world. So that's sort of one level. The other level is even if that doesn't succeed, there's still a secondary goal that's achieved, right? Which is to the extent you can, and this goes to, I think, more so the core question of how Putin stays in power. He wants to make sure that the Russian people understand that places like America, which hold themselves out as these, shining city on a hill democracies, they're not really. They're just like Russia. They're just as corrupt. Their business people engage in corruption. They lie to their people because Putin's trying to show his citizens don't aspire for a transparent, accountable democracy that's accountable to you. It doesn't exist. Yeah. You don't have it. Americans don't have it either. It's just like Russia over there. Don't aspire to anything more. So those 2 things I think are sort of what the core of what drives somebody like Putin. I think the motivations of like China and the government of China are like slightly different. But for Putin, I think that's basically it.
One last question, and then I know we have to go to questions because we have a bunch of people. Hi, everyone. There's the. I'm just kind of curious, and I've always been curious about this. Like, I mean, I understand internet trolls, right? I understand just disruption for disruption's sake, right? But how can like Russia be certain that whatever they do to disrupt tilts in their favor necessarily? Like, what if they just like disrupt things and they like end up disrupting things for Biden? Like, I mean, well, don't get into the Hunter Biden conspiracy, please. But like, besides that, but like, I guess one of the things that I'm like, if you're just going to create chaos and you think that chaos is enough, there have to be like, you have to have like, if you, as you said, like there are these specific end goals, but if you're disrupting the election, you have to think that it's targeted, right? You're not just going to bomb willy-nilly and send a million bombs out. Like, you're not just going to spray your missiles into like the Pacific Ocean and hope that one hits Alaska or like hits something. You target something. And some of this doesn't seem super targeted. It really does seem to be just kind of like trying to like put out various kinds of just craziness with unknown consequence. Does that make sense? Like, people don't know all the time when you put a meme out or you put fake news out how it's going to be received and what it's going to have, what the effect of it is going to be. So I'm just like curious, like some of this stuff you hear about the Macedonia boys and all of these kind of things that happened. It just seems, I'm just wondering about that. So anyway.
I actually do think that creating chaos is sort of enough. Again, like any number of outcomes here, I think are good outcomes for Putin. One of them is, getting Americans to question their own institutions, question the legitimacy of the election. Those are all good outcomes for Putin, to the extent there seems to be chaos emanating from American democracy. That's good for him. He gets to tell his people, look, it's chaos. It's not a real thing over there. They doubt their elections, because he's fixing the elections in Russia. So he's trying to communicate to his people, don't worry. It seems like chaos here and elections are fixed. Same's true over there. That's
so
what I
really
think.
It's just like chaos is the end goal because it makes it so like that is just enough for him.
I think it's it's an acceptable end goal. I mean, getting the sanctions lifted would be like icing on the cake. That would be great. But yeah, it seems to me they're pursuing a number of different goals, and some are more desirable than others, but any of them will be good for them.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to go to questions. Somebody noted in the chat that we always seem to have the same questioners on. I would just like to point out that this is not the fault of the questioners, 1, 2, and 3. It is the fault of all the people who do not ask questions even though they have them. And when they ask questions and I try to bring them in, they click no. And so these are the brave souls who both regularly pose questions, we're for that, and allow me to bring them in to answer it. So, Anne, whenever you think of a question, you
are welcome here.
Flag it, and we will bring you on. David Batts, who is never without a good question, although he's a little blurry today.
Stand really still, David.
Okay, I'll try not to move. Margaret, big fan, super happy that you're here. 2 questions. Ben and Kate, you can stop me after one. I'll start with the most popular question. And this may be a little bit too sensitive to address here, but I have to believe that you and the entire team at Lawfare are subject to various monitoring and collection activities from representatives, either legals or not legals of various countries. Are there things that you can share about the things you and the team do to manage these collection activities?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. So First of all, I assume that we are subject to a variety of foreign surveillance, and I more than assume that. I know I've been personally warned by the FBI about being targeted myself. I don't suspect I'm targeted for personal reasons. I suspect it is a lawfare connected thing. I am not really concerned all that much about Lawfare's communications, which are not sensitive and are all in pursuit of things that we publish. Unlike a lot of entities, Lawfare we don't have any sort of secret activities. You know, there's no intellectual property that we don't make public. There's no and the latency time in which we try to keep things quiet is very short. You know, Margaret submits an article and I edit it and then we publish it, right? And so there's not, you know, and a lot of that, if that were to become public, is pretty harmless. So that said, what is not harmless about Lawfare is the readership. And because there is a very heavy IC readership of the site, there's very heavy military readership, including, at least used to be, I think it's a little bit less of an issue than it used to be, but we used to have a very heavy readership among people who were forward deployed. And, you know, so the IP addresses associated with people accessing Lawfare can be somewhat sensitive. And so we have always been very careful not to collect data on the readership. You'll notice when you go to Lawfare, there's no, we're going to send you a cookie button. And that's because we're not. We make a point of not collecting data on the readership. It used to be at all. We can't do it at all anymore because, you know, donors send us money, and you all should, and then we have your email address associated with the contribution, right? We have to send you a thank you note. And there are various you know, newsletters and whatnot that people sign up for that we need some data in order to fulfill. But, you know, we don't want to know more than we absolutely have to know. And we're different from just about any other site that way. Most sites, their most monetizable asset is the information that they can collect on the people who read it. And we try not to do that. And it probably costs us a lot of money because it is actually.
It does cost you a lot of money.
Yeah,
I can tell you that.
But from my point of view, I don't want to collect any data that I can't protect. And given the state actors that are interested in us, I don't think I can protect anything. And so our general policy has been simply don't have the material. And we don't, you know, and to the extent that we therefore have to be more of a philanthropic charity, that's fine. You know, we collect money in other ways. The one entity that I've never been concerned about surveillance from is the U.S. government, and ironically, that is the one that I turned out to be a fool about, because as readers of the Washington Post,
that seems pretty stupid, Ben.
But I don't have, you know, the president has, as readers of my Twitter profile knows, the president has informed White House staff that I am a bad American, and Devin Nunes has asked witnesses about their communications with me, and so I do at this point assume that there's there are probably concerns that we need to think about in that regard, but it's, honestly, my concern is less about our communications than it is about the safety of the readership data itself.
There's some probably like witty banter or something, but yeah, it's just I don't know. It's not something embarrassing or anything. Maybe a little embarrassing, but
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of dog shirt videos in our editorial meetings, you know.
And on the internet generally now.
Exactly.
Like literally like 1,000% the number of dog shirt videos has gone up since we started in Lieu.
You know, the dog shirt videos are sold by a company named Clothing Monster, and
I'm sure it's not the only company that sells dog shirts.
No, but these dog shirts, the dog shirts I
endorse.
Dog
shirts that you love.
Yeah, and so like if the result of this is dog shirts have their day in the sun and lots of people patronize Clothing Monster, I'm okay with that.
We're really just angling for advertisers here. If you are listening, clothingmonster.com, Ben is like actively
in lieu of fun,
like,
brought to you by Clothing Monster.
Dog shirt day.
Tom McGuckin, who is the spiritual godfather of Margaret's presence on the show. The floor is yours.
Oh, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Ooh, but we can't hear you. Oh,
can you?
Yeah, got you now.
Okay. You know, I have as much trouble with my mic as you guys do. Margaret, I have so many million questions, but I have read the entire Mueller report and the entire Intelligence Committee report. Not completely, let's be honest. But I need to know about those annexes and redactations. Okay, the annexes, there were A, B, and C. There's a little bit of a footnote on one of them saying it's a referral for the federal enforcement agencies. That's all it says. Then it mentions RT and FARA violations, which is nothing new. Do you know anything more about those annexes?
I mean, I really don't. I mean, this goes to sort of Ben's point about how, you know, we do not have sort of additional information generally than what is published. So, you know, honestly, your guess is kind of as good as mine. I was, when I was on the Hill, I was Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and we didn't, like when we issued reports, we never had these sort of sensitive redactions or anything like that, because Foreign Relations Committee is more of like, it's just more public, right? But obviously the Intelligence Committee has access to information from the agencies. So honestly, I don't. And I think there's this question of, will we ever see it? I don't know. Will it be like 50 years from now or something? I just don't know. I mean, one thing we have seen though, like, there were obviously a bunch of redactions in the Mueller report. Sometimes things come out over time, which then, you know, make clear kind of what that was. And then these things can be unredacted. But, you know, the answer is, like, for me, no, I have no inside baseball on this. I don't know what the criminal referrals might, you know, bear fruit or not. So I just don't.
No.
All right. Catherine, the floor is yours.
Bye, Tom.
Oh, do I need...
Hi, Catherine.
Can I just quickly say, in defense of the people who ask a lot of questions, I'm not a screen hog. Every time I see that message, my being wants to say no. I hate being on camera, but because you guys are polite.
No, I'm so glad that you come on camera. This is great. It's wonderful. Also,
Catherine
your home
is
is
a
lovely.
model for you all. You know, It is.
Be more like Catherine, everybody.
Yeah.
No.
But the thing is, here's the thing. If you don't want to come on, that's fine.
I know.
But no, I'm not talking to you. You're on. And if you don't want to come on, that's fine.
Having you on.
But then
you have to
don't write in the chat that we always have the same people.
I know. That actually really embarrasses me. Anyways, so it does, because it looks like I'm a stage, and I'm so I didn't do any of my journalism in TV for that reason, because I absolutely hated being on camera. Anyways, moving on. So Margaret, I had a funny question, but now I have a more depressing question. Can I switch questions?
Yes.
Yeah, you can do whatever you want.
Okay, so I feel I feel like we are Ukraine right now. Like maybe it is really true that we are losing something, and I mean in a general broad sense. So when you read a report like that, which by the way, my question was, isn't that like eating sawdust? How do you get through something like that? Because I'm sure it's not, great prose. But is your reaction to that like, wow, we really are in trouble? Or because you've read a lot of those reports, so maybe this isn't, and that's not a very well posed question, but I think you follow what I'm asking.
I do.
Okay.
Yes, I do. And my answer is that what gives me like a little bit of solace and hope is that the fact that the report was published actually sets us apart from a government and a country where all this stuff is going on. It's all just a big morass. Nobody knows what the truth is or does any investigation. And like, that's just it. That's how the citizens live. They have just a ongoing, constant lack of confidence in their leaders and their government, that the government is working for them and not for their own business interest. So, the fact that we have 1,000 pages, laying out like a really kind of damning story here is the savior of the story. I guess I disagree a little bit with Ben that it's not scintillating prose. I've read some reports and like this one actually, I found it like quite interesting. For me, it wasn't necessarily eating sawdust because, knowing all of the details, actually, it's kind of where a lot of the interest is, a lot of the these human interactions, all these figures who are like political consultants, kind of knowing all of that. I want to know more about that. I want to know more about these shadowy like figures who are like these international, data collection and media manipulation people. I want to know more about those companies. I want to know more about those people. I want to know how they get their money. I want to know who pays them. So it actually sparked my interest in a number of topical areas where, as a citizen, I'm concerned. And I want to know more. And I think the more sunlight should be shown on the practices of these sort of shady international business, people who manipulate elections in ways that are designed to not be understood by the public in these countries, not just ours, all around the world.
Yeah. Margaret, there's a bunch of people that have been on the show that you should be in touch with, but Alex Stamos and the team he put together at the Stanford Internet Observatory is absolutely phenomenal. Kate Starbird on this. Also at Kennedy School, Joan Donovan, who I would love to have come on, by the way. She would be great. They should bookmark that for a Saturday combo. But yeah, I think that you're exactly right. It does kind of like, I do kind of like actually, doesn't it make you kind of wonder what is exactly the infrastructure to make this all happen? Because it has to be people, only a certain amount. And if it's not people, it's people building the algorithmic kind of solutions to execute something and fixing it when it goes wrong and deciding how to analyze the data that it collects. And so it is humans. It's just like, where are they coming from? And like, what is happening? And like, what are they doing with all of it? And how are they being funded? And I think that you're completely correct. I find that an endlessly interesting question.
And just to put foot stomp on it a little bit, I mean, look, let's not be naive. People have been collecting information on their electoral political opponents, muckraking, all that stuff. That's gone on forever. It's a thing, right? Back from like the founders. What's different, it seems to me, is the weaponization of data, the collection of data, the use of data to manipulate. That's what seems to be the really big development and the big step here that takes us away from those like more traditional notions of collecting, information on your opponent. It's like we are being targeted and manipulated as voters deliberately by foreign governments, by people trying to make money on this stuff. And we need to be more aware of it.
It's like you had 22s and now everyone had it, like people had 22s and now everyone has a Gatling gun or something. And like, it's just kind of.
I think the other big difference though is that in the past, I mean, there is a long history of active measures. There is no analog that I know of to the systematic theft of comms from a campaign. And granted, the volume of comms in a modern campaign is completely unprecedented, but the systematic theft of comms in a campaign and their public release by a foreign intelligence service. And that's that's an unprecedented operation, at least to my knowledge, and when something like that happens, you instinctively try to reach for an understanding of the broader constellation of material and activity against which it happened. And I think so, is it possible that there was some sort of similar social media manipulation going on in prior elections? Sure, there aren't that many prior elections in which we had social media, but it's certainly possible. But what we didn't have is the big hack and dump operation that was so flamboyant and so public that you simply had to say, okay, who did this and what else were they doing? What were they trying to do? And when you do that exercise, you find everything from Paul Manafort to, the weird ass Carter Page stuff, which, by the way, is still really weird, even without the hat. And you end up with this picture that's that's much richer than anything we've had in the past, but I do also think qualitatively different. All right, we need to wrap up.
Margaret, this was wonderful. Please
Thank
come on
you.
anytime.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. It's so fun, and I love the chat box. It's totally great. That was new since I was on last time.
Yeah, the Crowdcast community, I think the chat box has been really lovely, and it wasn't something that we could do in Zoom because we had to disable chat because of the bombers, and now this is wonderful, and it's been really fun, and it's mostly smart. It's a little trolly, but it's 90% smart and really great and really kind to each other. Yeah, it's a nice community. So thank you for joining it.
Kate, who do we have tomorrow?
We have, in lieu of novelty.
Oh, that's right. We have in lieu of hosts.
Yes, so it's
Gone Wild.
Yes, exactly. It's Tim Miller, Daniel Zitron, and Rachel Bidikofer. Who are all going to come on and have a conversation amongst themselves while I this is the newest thing we've done in a while.
Yeah, this is great.
I'm a little nervous.
No, I'm excited about it. We just asked. We said, of all the people who've ever been on In Lieu of Fun, the first three who say me are going to be our guests on Friday, and we're going to introduce them and then just kind of see what happens. And so that's tomorrow. It's going to be called Guests Gone Wild. And until then, which will be 22 hours and 58 minutes from now, we're not allowed to have fun anymore. But in lieu of fun, there are a lot of dog shirts available on clothingmonster.com.
And corn cob.
And there is a corn cob shirt available.
And tomato.
Margaret, I'm really sorry that at one point you were talking and I suddenly started cackling because I clicked on the chat. Someone had put the corn cob shirt picture in it, and it is so ridiculous that I just was like, anyway, and then I was not laughing at you, but that was
no worries.
Anyway, you can't have fun anymore, but you can have a dog shirt. So just something to think about, and we will see you tomorrow.
Bye, Margaret. It was great.